edition of the You Already Own a Cloud Office Hours. Today's topic will be rapidly adapting to remote work, which I understand with all the things going on today is a super hot topic. It looks like we have a great crowd today. Welcome the You Already Own a team, which is myself, Bob Ballard, Aaron Ward, George Scott, Ken Nubler, Scott Dowling, all wrangled together by Mary Tucker, who keeps us in line, make sure we meet all our obligations, and of course, on the guidance of our Vice President, Steve Winter. We don't forget, by the way, as a You Already Own It customer, which is our best and most important customers here at Planet Technologies, you have the ability to send in your questions, concerns. You need a little help on thinking something through, strategy, understanding what something's level of effort is, whatever it might be. Feel free to use the You Already Own It at go-planet.com email alias, and that delivers to everyone on the team you just heard, and we will get right back with you with your answers. So we have a pretty action-packed agenda today. We're going to start off with myself kicking off, just talking a little bit about the landscape and what's going on. We brought our Vice President, Jen Mason, on to talk about how you can help educate your customers around these new technologies that they might be adapting to. I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about our team's rapid deployment methodology, and in general, how we adopt a rapid deployment methodology from what might be standard in the industry, with an emphasis on getting the technology out, putting in safeguards, et cetera, so that you're not, just completely letting all the horses out of the barn. And then Scott Dowling and Shane Curtis will be talking about Windows Virtual Desktop. And then finally, we'll have our own Aaron Ward talk about some quick wins across a bunch of different areas, but primarily focus on some ways to securely enable or improve the security of your remote working environment with not a lot of effort. And then we'll wrap. So with that, let's get things started. So, obviously this is an interesting and challenging time for all of us. I think there's been a bunch of customers in various places here, right? Those customers that have thoroughly embraced sort of the cloud first infrastructure and gotten further along in their maturity. Many of you guys have had us come out and do a cloud strategy session and talk about the cloud maturity model. Those folks were in the best place to quickly just adjust. We have one education customer that basically has largely finished a full transformation to basically be a cloud native organization. And as a result, and I think Jen's going to talk about this a little bit, they went from, a handful of people using some of the technologies, especially around, cloud meetings, et cetera, to rapid adoption in a matter of days, right? But obviously with the, with the coronavirus and COVID kind of driving people to suddenly work from home on a timeline that maybe wasn't in alignment with what your organizational goals were, we suddenly have to adjust very quickly, right? And so, there's been a lot going on. One of the more interesting things, Microsoft saw its Teams adoption grow to 44 million from, I think the original number was 16 million active users to 44 million active users in about a week. So clearly there's a big impact on organizations and how they're suddenly working. And, there's a lot of things we're going to do that you can do, and we're going to talk about some of those opportunities and options here. But I wanted to kick things off with Jen Mason, our Vice President, to talk about, because no matter where you are, right, even if you're already done, I have all the technologies in place today and I'm ready to go. What you are going to have is a bunch of people who typically don't work from home suddenly having to work from home. So how do we bridge that gap? So with that, I'll turn it over to Jen. Do you want me to just run the slides for you, Jen, since it's coming back to me anyway?
That'd be great, Bob.
Okay, great.
So, hey, everybody. My name is Jennifer. I'm the Vice President of Learning and Knowledge Transformation over at Planet Technologies. And some of you guys are already going to be Evolve 365 customers. So I want to urge any of you that are existing customers, please reach out to us. In times of these big transitions, one of the things that we can do for any of our customers is provide that safety net for them. And so that's one of these things that Evolve can really do for us. It provides this online training. We have what we call a complete learning solution. And so this is going to be where you have someone that's a dedicated learning strategist that is going to come along and they are going to help you get the learning into the hands of your users. And so Bob talked a lot about how the landscape is a little bit different right now. And so we've actually been working together with our customers trying to figure out, okay, let me get you, we talk about just-in-time learning a lot. Let's get you just what you need right now. And so our team has been on the ground since all of this has been going. We have a ton of work from home content for people who have never worked from home before to great, now I have to do meetings at home. I don't know what tools to use. What do I use inside of OneNote? What do I use inside of Outlook? How do I join a meeting? How do I mute people in conversations? How do I do these different things? And putting it together in one simple work from home learning track so I could do it. And these are things that we have together in one spot so our users can easily get access to them. And so we're going to be putting this information out there. A lot of what we're finding right now is users they need to get this information out there. And the departments and the IT teams that are going to do it, they have so many things they need to focus on right now that they don't have the time to pull this training together. And so when they're working with us with Evolve, they can usually come to us. We did one customer in less than 48 hours. We had them up going on Teams and we turned around and did a webcast for their organization as an introduction to how do I work with teams in the classroom. And it was a great experience for them. Their tutors and professors were able to start working in classes immediately, and we're doing our next webcast for them later this week. And so it was a good experience. We were able to step in and fill that gap for them because they simply didn't have time. They weren't expecting. If you would have asked them 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks at this point, the weeks are kind of running together. I don't know if anyone else feels that. They wouldn't have expected that they were going to need to be working completely remotely in this amount of time. So they hadn't really taken the time to think through what do we need to do in terms of those learning solutions. So we have all of this ready to go. We also have some optional call support if we need to supplement your help desk and make that available for you. So all of this stuff we have available in multiple configurations. So at this point, we can provide content for you that is Microsoft Teams only. We're finding that very important for a lot of our customers. We know Office 365, you may be using it, but if you're very familiar with Office 365, maybe right now you just need to jumpstart with Microsoft Teams. We have some solutions that are just around that versus going with everything inside of Office 365. So we really have a whole plethora of solutions that we can mix and match and pull together just what you need. And the key element here is the learning strategist who's been doing this over the last 4 or 5 years with multiple customers, who's going to be able to come in on day one and say, hey guys, let's send out these campaigns to this group of users and help them get these pieces of information. And Bob, if you want to go to the next slide for me. I just want to show off some of the results of some of the things that we've done. And this is one of our scenarios where you see back in December is where this graph starts, and you see there was not a lot of activity inside of Teams. And you can see this is one of our scenarios where they were still running in Skype, but they were running and knowing, hey, eventually we're going to have to go to Teams, but we're not in a huge rush. We're going to take our time. We're going to plan it out. And then all of a sudden it was like, all right, we've had our first case of COVID, and starting on Monday, I think this was on a Thursday, starting on Monday, everyone is going to be working from home and go. And so you see how rapidly our graph goes from 0 to 8,000 when it comes to chat messages, and maybe not as much with calls and meetings, but it's still a pretty high jump. And so what you see in the top graph is where we had that usage, and what you see on the bottom is the trained users versus non-trained users. And so the users in blue are the ones that were actually accessing Evolve compared to those that weren't. And so in all of the categories, there's a much bigger average jump in the the chat, where's the bigger spike in the graph as well, you're seeing that the users that are accessing the training are also the ones that are completing the activities on the site. And so in times like these, I think one of the simple things that we can do is users are a lot less scared, a lot less apprehensive to change right now. There's so much change going on in the world anyway, that just having that training and making it available for them as a safety net is a very a nice thing that you can do for them. So if you have any questions, it's really easy to get started. We can get you up, we can get you started, we can customize a plan for what you need, and we're here to help with any of these solutions. So Bob asked me to just come and kind of give you a quick overview like that. Bob, is there anything else you want me to kind of speak to or cover in this update? I'm going to make sure I chat through all of the talking points that we went over.
No, I think you did a great job, and I think the key point here is we've been in the transformation, adoption game for a number of years, right? So this was just a different kinds of a transformation for organizations, right? It used to always be focused on I didn't used to use tools like Office 365, and now I do, right? But suddenly it's not even just that I'm using Office 365. Many of the organizations, almost everyone on this call probably is using some piece or part of Office 365 today. Certainly the majority are. But then now what we're finding is we have to use it in a different way. So we have been prepared on how to work with organizations to transform their users, and it's just a shift in sort of what's important in the focus and a little bit of how we deliver the message. But we were completely prepared for this, and so that's why we were able to come together and have these sort of adaptive scenarios that were able to do this. Having a platform like this enables these kinds of changes for sure.
Yeah,
thanks, Jen.
No problem.
So the word of the day, there are really two key words of the day that happened over the last several weeks. I joke with, everybody is posting all the things they're doing and how they're bored and all those things. All of us in IT probably don't feel that way. I know I've had, 12 and 14 hour days trying to help customers get through the knothole on this transition, and obviously Windows Virtual Desktop, which we're going to talk about in a second, and Teams have been the conversation. Now we've done a bunch of at least 2, maybe 3 calls on Teams on the session. I know we have a lot of repeat attenders on our monthly calls, so I wasn't going to focus on what Teams can offer. I think the majority of this crowd understands what Teams can do for you. If not, feel free to reach out to us, and any of the folks on my team that you saw listed at the beginning of the slide, we're happy to go over that with you. What I thought I'd talk about a little bit, and this applies, by the way, the methodology and our thought process here applies not only to Teams, but really any solution that you need to roll out quickly. Because what happens is, look, we have a lot of government customers, a lot of highly compliant customers, whether they have DoD requirements, government requirements, HIPAA requirements, FinServ requirements. That's a big chunk of our customer base here at Planet. So, when we roll out something like Teams, we typically go in, we do a bunch of planning. We have maybe a couple of weeks of operational, technical, and governance planning to get a plan together. We put together, a pilot. We target some agencies. We adjust communication plans. We do everything to make this be fantastic, right? And that's how, that's the go-to-market strategy for most organizations around any new technology. The problem is suddenly we don't have that kind of time to be useful here. So how do we rethink this? So the answer isn't because the same customers still have the same requirements. The answer isn't let's just turn it on and not think about it. The answer is, that planning, et cetera, was to make choices. Let's go together with a limited template about the things that you most need, locked down in a way that will protect you. So example, just quickly, let's limit who has the capability to create teams. If that's something that's going to be a concern, let's limit that in these rapid adoptions, right? If there's any concerns or issues about external sharing, we'll turn it off for now until we come up with a reason to not turn it on, et cetera. That these may not be our guidance in a completely well-rounded governance planning session, but ultimately, if there's concerns about them, we'll just turn them off for now. Let's get useful things out to the users, and we'll talk about a plan to come back and enable some of these capabilities later. So, our rapid teams deployment, phase one is tactical. Let's get you working with meetings. Let's get the training out there. Whether it be, if you're a large organization or an educational institution, you may need Teams live events for very large classes or groups and meetings. So let's get out there. Let's get everyone licensed. Let's get the tenant configured. Let's get any kind of conference call integration that's going to happen established, right? And let's come together with the learning content, right? That's the Evolve 365 stuff, the getting started guides, the quick start guides. Talk about, do you need additional call center support, right? We're going from, your help desk is probably not thoroughly trained on some of these technologies if you haven't been broadly using them. So do you need support there? We'll talk about that. And then, one of the things that we recommend as a best practice that has been super successful in these rapid adoption plans is let's build a custom, all things Teams kind of team with you with a bunch of good content in it, pointing it back to Evolve as well as other things, and allow discussions and chats for people that are new users so that the community can help each other. So that's phase one. We can do this in a matter of days, right? And then as we think forward, then let's go ahead and get the teams out there. Let's get, we'll set up to 50 of them for you and show you how they're done. Let's hit let's hit your key departments, your, whatever it might be. We'll go ahead and create the teams and invite the users. You may not be experienced in this yet. Obviously, we'll get it turned out and built in a, what we'll say is a limited and controlled manner to get the functionality out there while still, calling in to having no questions around guidance, et cetera. The idea here, right, is, to get this thing broadly adopted and broadly rolled out very quickly. About another week, that can be done, right? So in less than 2 weeks, you have everything going. Some things can be up even faster than that, right? It's we'll work with you to get things steadily improving at a rapid rate of time. So again, it's about rethinking the way we do. This is stuff that happens at the end of projects in a lot of cases, right? So putting in the right amount of governance and planning, like a day, just to get through all of it. We're not going to answer every question. We're going to lock down things if there's any questions on and go forward. And this methodology, as you'll hear, when Scott talks a little bit, and Shane on Windows Virtual Desktop, and our rapid deployment. And I don't think we're talking more around the technology in that section, but in the rapid deployment methodology, we did the same thing. How do we get it up and running and out there for you quickly? So just a couple of things, and I sort of laid all this out when I was explaining what it is. It gets you up and running in days. Get access to the tools and services that can get your users up to speed. Going back to Jen's topic, I think all of this is moot if we roll out these technologies really quickly, but nobody knows how to use them, so they don't, right? We didn't benefit anybody in any way. And, it's just enough planning to get you safely and securely started, right? What it's not, these aren't, these full planning and governance sessions. We're not delivering 600 pages of documentation to you. Those are things that you may require long-term, and we encourage that to happen, whether it's by you, another partner, or plan it to come back and close the loop on this. And, in larger organizations, you're probably not done when you're done this, but it's out, it's being used, then we can go back and turn it into what it needs to be done, right? There's a, sort of an agile implementation of these collaboration technologies. So with that, I'm going to transition. We've got a lot to cover today, so I know we're going pretty rapidly. If you guys have questions, feel free to put them in the chat window. We'll also open up at the end if you want to ask them via voice. I'm going to turn things over to Scott and Shane on the Windows Virtual Desktop.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Shane, do you want to kick off? And then,
sure.
Yeah, perfect.
Sure thing. Yeah. So this is Shane Curtis. I'm a consultant with Planet. And I usually specialize mostly in desktop management and deployment and like SCCM, Intune. But of late, in the last 6 months or so, I have been heavily doing WVD. And I was excited about it from the very beginning, about what it what you can do with Windows Virtual Desktop. And I did predict that this was going to take off, and I just never knew how right I was going to be. Not trying to brag, but but it's just become, suddenly I'm like super busy. I like Bob was saying before, I have never been busier than I am right now with this. So one of the things we wanted to talk about first was you know, a little bit about what WVD is and what the benefits are around it. And along those lines, the benefits are much the same as traditional VDI in some ways. So I want to talk about what's the same and what's different. So what they have in common is that VDI will, you know, save you a lot of money. Most experts agree that, you know, managing hardware and software comes with high total cost of ownership, and usually about 50 to 70%. TCO, and so it can be expensive to run a traditional desktop environment, but VDI does away with a lot of that, because provisioning desktops is much faster, and ongoing management and support costs are lower, and it's easily scalable, right? You can scale up and down your environment as needed, so you can save on costs and not be paying for things that you're not using. Next would be like centralized management. So the management is much better. You know, being that everything is stored in Azure and managed there, it's all centrally managed. So for updating and patching the operating system or the applications, or for backing up files or scanning for viruses, it's all much simpler because you can just do it to the VMs in the host pool, or you can do it to a master custom image that you deploy in WVD, and then you just need to maintain it from there. And there's tools for maintaining, like SCCM and Azure Automation are tools that you can use to further manage the environment from there. Security wise, that's a huge benefit for VDI, right? Because you're taking all of that data and you're putting it out in Azure, so your users aren't carrying around laptops and all that user data on their laptops around with them, where it could be lost or stolen. So inherently, it's just more secure. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about security a little later on in depth. And finally, increased productivity. So VDI basically makes the host machine, whatever machine you're accessing your virtual desktops with, it makes it unimportant, right? It's a non-issue. You could go to work, you could go to school, you could go home, and you can just get on any device. And as long as it has connectivity to the internet, you can get on and connect, and all your user data and your apps follow around with you. And so the question you might ask is, why don't more organizations do VDI if it's so great, and why aren't more organizations doing VDI? Well, with VDI, and this is where I get into, what's different about WVD and VDI. With VDI, you have to set up all of these things yourself: the web access, the diagnostics, the gateway, the connection broker, the load balancing. You have to, manage all the storage and networking yourself. All of that, whether it's on-prem or whether it's in Azure, if you moved the components up there, you'd be managing and setting up and managing all those individual components. It's expensive, it's complicated, and so ultimately it's frustrating. And so a lot of people just don't do it. Setting up your own VDI is difficult, and that's why many organizations have not done it. So what does WVD bring to the table? Microsoft takes all those components, and this is a high-level architecture picture of WVD, and you can see that they manage in like as a managed service, and like a black box. They manage all these components like web access and diagnostics and load balancing and the connection broker, all of that. The storage and networking is obviously up there in Azure, and all the compute resources. So all you need to do is manage your host pools that target the user groups that you need to service, and manage specifically the VMs and the images that are part of that service. So once you get it set up and running, it's it's super quick and easy to set up and running. I mean, it's well, okay, let me say, in comparison to VDI, it's super quick and easy. I feel like it's super quick and easy based on what we used to have to do with VDI. There's still some challenges around it, and we're gonna talk more about that in a minute. So the black box management is a big game changer there. I feel like that is what is going to drive a lot of people to this. And then this is another reason why a lot of people are going to start using WVD. I think this is going to take off, even without the recent events with COVID-19. I think this would have taken off. But the secret sauce that makes all this work is the fact that you can deliver a true desktop operating system through this scenario. A lot of people, a lot of organizations, I should say, have set up RDS environments in the past. Probably everyone on this call has some kind of environment set up where you're either delivering remote apps or maybe even whole desktops to users, but it would be a server OS, right? So with Windows 10 Enterprise Multi-Session, which was just recently released, I think around the time of the last Ignite session, Microsoft conference last September, this is something exclusive to WVD, and it's a true desktop operating system. It looks just like Windows 10 Enterprise. The big differentiating factor being that you can divide it up and like broker it out as sessions to people connecting. So it's much more scalable in the sense that you can stack a whole bunch more users on a single VM rather than, without being able to do session based like that. You would have to allocate, one VM per person, whether it's a pooled or a dedicated VM, or you would still be having to dedicate one VM per person, regardless of whether it's dedicated to that user or not. So with the sessions, much easier to get better cost savings there and have more people on there. So then you might ask, what's the level of effort around this setting up WVD? And I touched on that for a second there, but let me tell you just a little bit briefly about what that entails. First of all, regarding prereqs for WVD, you do have to have a traditional Windows Server AD domain set up somewhere, right? For most organizations, this is probably going to be your on-premises AD. And you would need to connect down to be this third bullet. You would need to connect down from WVD in Azure. You need to make sure you have connectivity through ExpressRoute or through VPN to your on-premises domain controller, because you're going to need to join those VMs that are in the host pools to that domain. And it's also going to need to create if a user account does not already exist, that's maybe being synchronized up to your Azure AD, which is required for authentication to WVD. It's required to have a user account in both areas, in that on-prem AD and in Windows, the Azure AD as well. Then that's why you need to have that server AD. It's not supported yet to join the VMs directly to Azure AD yet. So if you didn't want to store it there, you could also just set up a VM with Windows Server Active Directory domain set up there, or you could set up Azure Active Directory domain services, which is basically emulating a Windows Server AD type environment in Azure. In that case, the user IDs though would be synced from Azure AD over into Azure AD DS. But either way, you don't have to worry about maintaining two separate accounts in those two separate locations. But that's where the VMs will be joined. Now, joining to Azure AD is going to be supported later this calendar year, so they are working on that. Another prereq would be setting up your FSLogix profile. So what FSLogix is it's basically your user profiles, right? In this type of environment, and I'm going to skip to the next slide real quick just to have a visual of that. But in this type of environment where you're brokering sessions to the users, you need to be able to make sure that they get their user profile regardless of what VM they're connecting to. So in order to make that doable, so you don't have to worry about trying to replicate their user profile across a whole bunch of VMs, Microsoft acquired FSLogix profiles, FSLogix a while back, and I think probably about a year ago. But this solution has been around for a while, and it's very mature. I've set it up. It's very solid, and it basically makes it look to the Windows operating system like the user profile is just there. It's just your regular local user profile with all your user settings and application settings and everything stored in there, and it no matter what VM they get brokered to when they start up WVD, they're going to get their user profile and it's going to follow them around. That's stored in a VHD file, right? So that's why it's important when you're doing that you need to set up one of these options here under step 2. You need to give those VHD files a place to live where it can access it. So you can put that on a file server, either on-prem or up in Azure AD, or you could put it in Azure Files, but that requires Azure AD DS as a prereq, just FYI, or you can use Azure NetApp Files, which is a higher performing option for file storage, but you could put those VHDs in any one of those locations. And then finally, for prereqs, you just need to make sure you have your credentials set up. It does require a subscription admin, an Azure AD global admin, an AD administrator for that Windows Server AD, and a WVD tenant admin for the setup of the tenant. So you need to make sure you have those in place before you get started. From there, creating the WVD tenant is very quick, takes about 15 minutes. You just grant permissions to the WVD service to query Azure AD. You assign an Azure AD user the tenant, I got cut off there, tenant creator role is what that should say. And then you can create the tenant with PowerShell. So, and that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about a little bit as far as challenges in just a minute. But a lot of the commands are still driven by PowerShell right now. They're working on getting a portal experience out, and that's going to be out by the end of Q2 this year. And then at that point, you'll be able to do everything within the GUI, instead of having to use PowerShell commands. But much of the management is still PowerShell based right now.
I will add, Shane, you and I were just talking about this earlier today, that there is some offerings from Microsoft today that will allow some third-party management software that are out there, Nerdio and a few others, at no charge for 90 days. Right. But then obviously you understand that they are a for-fee product and there will be a cost after that. But that's something that might be able to get you, through the initial setup if that's something that interests the customer for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So Nerdio and Citrix is another one that I saw. I was glad you pointed that out to me, Bob. And I went and looked up some of the Lighthouse information, and it was talking about other partners like Citrix as well. And and if you partner with them, then they have a nice overlay of WVD right now, right? That creates a really streamlined GUI experience for all of this. And Microsoft is working on their own in traditional fashion, right? They've partnered with a lot of different organizations, Citrix being probably at the forefront mostly. They have a lot of partners that they're working with on this, and the partners are ahead of the curve on some things, right? On providing the GUI, and they give you that added value, right? And then Microsoft, catches up, right? And they create their own portal, and maybe you think, well, I don't need it that much anymore. But then the Citrix and Nerdio and everybody, they find new ways to innovate and make the product even better. So that's one of the benefits right now of partnering. So creating the tenant is very quick. One key part, like after you create the tenant, it is recommended that you create a service principal, which is basically like a service account in Azure, right? So that you can, and that's for authentication. So WVD can authenticate with Azure AD, and you have to do it that way if you want to support multi-factor authentication. So if you want users to have to be authenticate via MFA when they connect up with their WVD client. Or I say WVD client, or it could also be any modern browser that supports HTML5. They could use that to connect up with WVD as well. So that's another point I'll make real quick, is that there's a client for iOS, there's a client for Android, there's one for Windows, there's one now for Linux. Microsoft partnered with iGel on that one. So there's lots of different clients, and if you don't have a client, there's the browser option. So your users should be able to connect one way or another somehow. Probably the lion's share of setting up WVD is the last point in the slide, which is creating custom images. Right now, that is probably the lengthiest part of this process, because one of the things that is really going to be a game changer, but it's not available yet, is MSIX App Attach. So MSIX App Attach is a new way of packaging your apps. I don't know exactly how long it's been out, but as far as WVD integration, it's not out yet. But once that is available, we will be able to package apps in this format. And then it will be a lot like, if I go back to this slide real quick, it's going to be a lot like this. So this little plugin over here that describes user profile, and this apps, the apps would be the MSIX app package right here. And it works a lot like an FSLogix profile. It's a VHD file, or I think it's VHDX actually on both of them, but it's in VHD type format, and it just gets plugged in. And they demoed this at Ignite. They demoed this again recently. There was a virtual event just last week. I don't remember if they demoed it there, but they demoed it a few months ago as well. But it works very well once you get it set up. And in particular, they demoed, I think it was OneNote, right? And they showed how a user could log into WVD and get brokered to a certain VM, right? A session on a certain VM. And they showed how the app wasn't there before, and it plugs in a matter of seconds, has all of that user's application settings already, all their notes were already there, and it's not actually installed on the machine, so it doesn't even make the file size any bigger. So really neat technology. It is going to take some repackaging, so there'll be some work there, but once you get to that point, it will make it so that you won't have to have huge custom images that are unique to whatever group of users you're trying to target. Because as it is right now, you either have to make like a really huge single image with every single application that you could possibly need, and it makes it very difficult to manage that image, and you have to update it a lot. Or you'd have to create a lot of images, manage a whole lot of images that are all custom and have different unique sets of applications that target certain users. So if we could get around that, you could just use the image straight out of the gallery. Microsoft has like these gallery images that are just that they keep constantly updated with whatever the latest patches are and the latest version like 1909. And you can just use that gallery image with O365 Pro Plus already built in. And by the way, they've optimized Pro Plus for WVD, so it's a really good experience. You can just take that gallery image and use it as basically your starting point. You don't have to even create an image, and then you could just say, I want to attach all these apps when the user logs in. So they get their user profile from FSLogix, they get their apps from MSIX App Attach, and you're ready to go. You could just have a single really plain vanilla image. So it's going to be a game changer. But as far as availability on that, again, that's going to be later this year is what they're shooting for. So right now, that's a lot of our work is we typically have to go in and say, okay, well, let's see what users we need to target. We create a whole bunch of custom images for the different user things, user scenarios. Finally, you would deploy you could deploy either a full desktop or a remote app. Now, actually deploying the host pool is really not that difficult. They do have an Azure Resource Manager offering or ARM offering available for that. So it's basically a wizard that you go through, and you take all of the prereq stuff that you set up, all the information that you gathered for that, and you just plug it in, and you say how many VMs you want. It has a tool in there that will make recommendations for how many VMs of what size you would need to support, high-end users or people that use, high amount of graphics, or maybe for lighter users, you could stack more sessions on a single VM because maybe they're just doing email and browsing the internet. But you go through the whole wizard, and you just basically say I want to create this. It creates it for you. The only difference in time there is going to be the number of VMs created, and so it will just create it for you and create all those VMs. They are persistent. They're not dynamically spun up and down according to the need. They are persistent VMs, and in that sense, they do need to be turned on and off. So you have to one of the key parts of this process is also setting up auto scaling, or the ability to be able to drain sessions off a VM and say, I want to shut this off during off-peak hours so that I'm not paying for that. Because if it's running, you're paying for it. But if you shut it off, you're not. So you want to have a nice, solid experience for that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. But it's really quite easy from that perspective. That's an area where you don't have to do a lot of PowerShell. It's all GUI based, and you can also deploy just a remote app. Now, if you deploy a remote app, you do still need a separate host pool, but you could just deploy the app to the user. You could deploy Office apps like Word or whatever into the user, and when the user launches it through their WVD client, it looks just like it's running locally. It doesn't look any different at all. So really handy in that sense. And I already talked a little bit about FS Logic, so we won't talk about that now. Regarding like what kind of challenges that there are, as far as challenges in setting this up, most of the challenges are actually just directly linked to the fact that there's some more advanced things that they have been talking about, but they're not available yet. And so everything can be set up. It's a solid product. You can set everything up, and once you have it set up, it is for the end user experience, it's super easy. It couldn't be easier for them to connect. It's really on the IT group to do the initial setup. So the benefits that are coming soon are really going to benefit more the IT group than the end user. With one exception, I'll mention the Teams support. So I already mentioned the scaling. Now, auto scaling when I first did this for a customer back in I think it was like end of November. You had to use a script, and it was kind of clunky to set up. And now they have available, you can do it through Azure Automation. I haven't tried that yet, but it should be a much better experience. And partners like Citrix have a very nice, easy GUI that's available right now for setting up your auto scaling, so you can decide when your peak and off peak times are, and give it all the instructions it needs for turning on and off VMs. Next thing that's not available yet, but this one is supposed to be coming soon. I think it should be out by the end of Q2, but they didn't make a promise on those lines, but I get the sense it's going to be in the next few months, is AV redirection for Teams. So right now you can deploy Teams inside of WVD, but it's only supported in its unoptimized state, right? In other words, audio video is probably not going to be a great experience. Again, if you partner with Citrix today, or probably Nerdio too has options just like this, and there's other partners as well, they provide optimization for Teams today, right? But it's going to be built into the product coming up in a few months, and it makes a big difference. Like you can see they demoed this at Ignite as well, and you can see a big difference in the audio and video quality, right? So that's going to be big, that one. And then finally, like for managing the VMs, you can use SCCM to manage the VMs, but no Intune management is available right now. That's supposed to be coming out later this year, being able to manage them through Intune. And also other options if you want to do if you want to set up automatic updating, you can use Azure Automation for that. So options there.
Hey, Shane, I know we're running a little bit short on time, but can you speak to a lot of the customers that we're engaged with around Windows Virtual Desktop, already has a current VDI solution in place, and due to the rapid need of remote workers, that VDI environment can't support the numbers that they're looking at today. Are there any integration points between the two, or by leveraging some of the known admin tools in those third-party VDI solutions to help, kind of bring in Microsoft's VDI to assist with that exponential growth? Yes,
there are. So, let me talk. I'll get to that in just one more slide here. By the way, this is what the portal is going to look like. Just FYI, once the portal experience becomes available, you'll be able to do a lot of these things through here. This is one of the things I was talking about, that this should be available by the end of Q2 this year is when they promised this. So coming soon, and should do away with a lot of the PowerShell commands that you need to run today to do some of the management behind the scenes. But yeah, there's a strong pool of partners that add all kinds of extra capabilities on top of WVD. These are just a few of them listed here. Nerdio's not on this slide, but they're another big one. Citrix presented a lot at Ignite. They had a lot of presentations, and they have some really nice capabilities going already. They are just right now they provide just an improved workspace experience, you know, and not having to use PowerShell commands like you have to right now on a lot of the management section of WVD. The image management is simplified, and they have a nice GUI for it as well. Hybrid cloud, like if you're trying to accelerate your move from on-prem VDI and migrate it up to WVD, they have tools for that. One of these other partners, Lakeside, is big into migration of VDI, on-prem VDI as well. So they have a product in Azure Automation that helps you migrate that.
That's great. Thanks, Shane. And if you could spend a minute or two, one of the second topic that generally comes up in conversation time having with customers that are looking to leverage this as a solution are some of the security concerns and what components within the Microsoft stack can be leveraged to ensure that we're keeping this environment, as these remote workers are outside of the purview of the office, if you will, what can be leveraged to ensure their security?
Right. So with regards to that, some of the capabilities around, you know, some of the security of WVD just comes from the fact that it sits on top of Azure and it interfaces with Azure AD as well, right? So you know, the fact that it sits on Azure, if you look at some of these statistics, Azure offers like 90 different compliance offerings, like things like CGIS and NIST, that organizations are going to want to stay compliant. They employ over 3,500 cybersecurity experts globally. They use advanced AI to analyze 6.5 trillion global signals every day, and they detect and respond to those threats. And overall, Microsoft invests $1 billion annually in cybersecurity. So that's that Azure layer that gives you a lot of security, but Microsoft 365 gives you a lot of security too. So if you look at the Azure AD aspect of things, what I was talking about earlier, using MFA, that's huge, right? You know, everybody's trying to implement MFA now. It's almost like a requirement anymore these days that you use MFA. And if you set up MFA with conditional access, you can basically say, you know, I'm going to block people out. I'm not going to let you access WVD unless you have authenticated with MFA. And on the management side of things, you've got the role-based access control in Azure AD that's always been there that lets you control who is able to get into the portal and manage your WVD environment from an IT perspective. Now, as far as WVD like itself and what security it provides, one of the big things is this reverse connect technology, and that's that they use this reverse connect technology to connect users to their sessions. Traditionally, with like RDP connections, you need to open up that port to wherever you're trying to RDP to. I think it's like 3389 or something. But you would have to open up that port. With Reverse Connect, you don't have to do that. It's just an HTTPS 443 port that the client establishes with WVD, and then WVD on your behalf goes and authenticates with Azure AD, and then brokers that user to a connection. And so that's what connects you up to that. You don't have to open any ports outbound from your WVD environment down, you know, out to the public cloud or even your corporate network. So great in that sense. And you know, again, you can use any of these clients to connect, or you could use a modern browser. And the great thing about this is in true you already own it fashion, you probably already own this. This is most organizations already have one of these types of licenses for their users. And so if customers who have these licenses are eligible to access Windows 10 single and multi-session and Windows 7 with WVD using one of these licenses. And if you did want to provide a server OS, you would just need RDS Cal licenses with active software assurance to be able to do that. And with that, that's all I had. I can take any questions or.
Yep, we'll save questions at the end, or we can post them in the chat window.
Okay.
Just kind of sit tight and look in the chat window if any questions come on that front. I did, before we go on, there's a couple things, right? So we've applied the same methodology that I talked about in, in the Teams rapid deployment to a rapid deployment program for Windows Virtual Desktop as well, where we can actually get you up and running and serving out, at least an image for some segment of your user base in as little as 4 days, right? So that's the quote our Shane's boss Lisa Cobble threw out there. We can get them working in 4 days, so I'm sticking to it.
Yeah,
And
that's about right. I meant to say that actually. I was going to say about a week, but yeah, essentially, 4 or 5 days I would say to get a basic environment up and running.
Yep, absolutely. So if this is something that you guys need to enable, and just at a really high level, there's a lot. Shane did a great job of talking about everything that the platform has to offer. But if we tie it back to sort of the theme today, right? One of the things that so Office 365 already works great in a remote environment, and we may or may not have all the tools as far as Office apps, depending on whether your clients are laptops or not, and certainly it can address those. But one of the other big reasons why customers are looking for this is they have legacy apps in their environment that they need to get access to, right? So the SAPs of the world and procurement systems and custom applications and all of those things, and those are the things that are really standing out, that are slightly broken today, or are being accessed through more traditional remote access methodologies like VPNs, which have a whole host and series of complications and problems from an IT perspective. So with that, unless you have anything else to add, Shane, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron Ward to take us through the end.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
All right. Welcome, Aaron.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it, Bob. So just a message to those that are on the line that are our CEOs that have been working with us. You've heard it already from Shane and a few others, is that, let's use what you already own. The goal here is to enable the remote workforce. And if we're thinking about the remote workforce, there's a lot of things that are happening, even an escalation of attacks that are happening from a security perspective. We also need to make this an ease of use transition for our workers that are now working at home. So some of the things that you might want to be thinking about, that especially if you have Office 365 today, is leveraging Azure Active Directory conditional access. You're able then to go ahead and be able to force where workers are actually working from home, and I'm doing that as air quotes because this is a transformational time, and depending on how the world reacts after this, we could be seeing that the majority of our workforce may start working from home. But when we think about conditional access, this allows us really that ability to determine not only where's that connectivity coming from, globally, but also are we meeting certain of the requirements that we need as an organization to ensure that the guest host that is being utilized, that may not be a managed machine, is actually going to be meeting some of our minimal specifications. Another great one is Azure B2B, which is Azure Business to Business. And this is tied in with Azure Active Directory, where it enables you to get past a lot of the complicated identity management that is going on between organizations. A lot of times that when we're working with like state and local governments, sometimes we have a single identity environment that we get to work with. Majority of the time when we're working with a lot of organizations is that each one has their own identity management solution, and then also is managing on most of the time how do they allow remote organizations that they work with into their environment. Utilizing Azure B2B, number one, it sets your security posture for anybody that's coming in to utilize your resources to at least whatever your security posture is. So that could be certain conditional access elements, like you can only be accessing this from within an IP range, or we're thinking about global, like only accessing this from the United States, to anything for multi-factor authentication. And the benefit here is that you as an organization don't need to worry about licensing that has to do with those that you're working with, because that is covered underneath your licensing model already. Another great one to be thinking about is Azure Active Directory Application Proxy. This is a great solution for those organizations that are trying to figure out how do we harden our identity. Identity is key to ensuring that we're enabling the remote worker. So if I have legacy applications that are utilizing the Kerberos or SAML or unsecured connectivity, I have the ability to stage up an Azure Active Directory application proxy that will use Azure Active Directory as its authorization and authentication methodology, and then allow that application to transparently work in the background while securing, ensuring that there's, again, we're able to utilize conditional access, we're able to see if there's brute force attacks happening, et cetera. Also, when we think about Intune app protection policies, this is something that a lot of our organizations own already today as well. Is, we may have, again, instead of managed devices, we're going to start going to unmanaged devices. But we need to provide policies around applications that, again, leverage the whole kit and caboodle of how our identity is going to be handled and what applications may require different compliance methodologies and more extensive identity security than we may for a different lower basically compliant applications. So I'm thinking about like CGIS, IRS 1075, PubSec. We might be thinking about HIPAA applications, et cetera, that we are trying to ensure that we're creating on that for management. Last technology that I want to talk about is multi-factor authentication. Many people utilize different authentication models out there, but you do have Microsoft multi-factor authentication that's usually included within the majority of our customers' licensing models within their Office 365. This, again, allows us to enable that remote worker for us to be able to provide security on that identity because we know that they have a device that they own. And so when they're accessing resources, again, from a unmanaged or unsecured device, in our opinion, we can actually do a two-factor authentication to start alleviating a lot of the brute force attacks that are going on or potential shadowing. But the biggest part here to be thinking about is what Jen Mason mentioned in the beginning is how do we handle clear, transparent, and clear communication policies out to our end users. This is a huge transition for workers. Being able to work from home, a lot of times they'll feel isolated. A lot of times they'll feel, I don't have the water cooler to go talk to you. And it's really important that an organization has clear expectations, clear communications, and clear learning strategies to be able to help these workers be able to adapt and also become very productive within their new environment that they're working in. Certain things that we've seen out there, we even do it within our own company, is there might be social hours where it's remote social hours where people are getting together utilizing like Teams to be able to do video conferencing to bring that camaraderie within the group itself. It could be also other things for just clear policy of how we will handle access to an environment. And it could also be things that an organization may need to invest in to provide guidance on how to maybe either invest in better technology at their home if they're utilizing an unmanaged personal machine, or potentially how do they upgrade and provide that clear communication. So when we're thinking about this, again, a lot of the stuff you already own. A lot of the stuff is built into Office 365. It expands all across your whole entire environment, whether it's Windows virtual desktops or Office 365 or even homegrown applications that you're supporting on premises. But again, the key to everything is about communication and then how we are going to support those workers. And I believe that everything we presented today is a great foundational aspect to be able to enable and adopt this new transformation that we're all seeing today. So with that, Bob, I'd like to hand this back to you.
Yep, absolutely. So one thing to add, Aaron, because when you were talking about multi-factor authentication, going with the theme of you already own it, one of the things that I think people often forget because they think of, MFA with regards to access to Office 365, but because it's being driven by Azure Active Directory, and Azure Active Directory authenticates with lots of other products and services out there. Something like an example, many of the tier one VPN solutions like Cisco and others offer like, basically well documented MFA integration, right? So you can actually have your your AnyConnect actually pop an MFA authentication for VPN users today, right? We talked about a lot of reasons, and some better solutions than traditional VPN for access, but we also know that lots of our customers are still using that today, right? So, taking advantage of things that are already in your infrastructure to better secure that environment is one other thing I'd like to leave people with as well. So I know we're running a little late, so I'm just going to wrap it up really quick. We have a number of offerings that we talked about today. The Rapid Teams for EDU, Rapid Teams for government and commercial, as well as the Windows Virtual Desktop offer, and the Evolve Rapid Teams adoption plan for team specific content, et cetera, at a lower price. We have data sheets on all of these things, as well as specific ones for each one of those. Feel free to reach out to the You Already Own It at go-planet.com if you have questions or want to know more about those, or of course your account rep or the cloud strategist if you have a relationship with them as well. They'll be happy to send that information over to you. With that, as we're wrapping up, are there any questions anybody wants to have on voice, or type them into the chat window? We'll stick around for a minute or two. All right. Well, thanks everyone. We'll sit on the chat window for a few more minutes to see if any other questions come in. With that, I hope everybody, I hope this was useful for everyone, and I thank everyone for joining. Good luck. Thanks.